and welcome to another edition of the Mayor Dan Paletko Show. I'm very pleased to have as my guest today an individual who is the PR director for the Detroit Metropolitan Airport. So, Mike Conway, I'm so glad that you're here to be my guest, and we're going to talk about the airport a little bit. So,
okay, it's my pleasure to be here.
And Mike, how long have you been at Detroit Metropolitan Airport?
I went out to the airport in November of 1986.
Okay, so you've been there a while. You've seen all the growth and all the development that's taken place.
I've seen quite a bit. Actually, before I came out there was when the airlines started consolidating into hubs, and that process began before I got there, but a lot of the major development has happened since 1986, so yes, you're right.
I remember when I was doing quite a bit of flying in connection with my job, I used to fly on Republic. I think it was the Blue Goose, and then that got incorporated with Northwest Orient, and now it's the Delta. And we have the fortunate of being an international hub.
That's correct, yeah. Detroit is a big, strong market. There's a lot of demand from our business community and leisure travel community, too, for good air service. So that's one of the ingredients that makes a successful hub. Another one is geographic location. And another one, an important one, is that an efficient airfield, plenty of capacity in both the airfield and the terminals, and then an airline willing to choose your community to be a hub. And Republic Airlines, that you mentioned, was the airline that chose Detroit. Once they merged with Northwest, people were a little bit concerned because Northwest had a hub in Minneapolis, and that's not that far away. But actually, both of those hubs are very successful. Our geographic location makes us ideal for launching long-haul international service to the Far East. If you look at a globe, took a string and drew a line from Detroit over the top of the globe to let's say Tokyo, it would be a little bit shorter than it would if you flew directly west. So, and tremendous amount of fuel savings. So our geographic location really helps us in terms of international service as well.
I was always surprised a few years ago. My youngest daughter was like in an ambassador program, and so she got to spend the summer in Australia, and it was our summer, not Australia's summer, but yeah, she ended up flying to Los Angeles and then on to Australia versus kind of going that northern and then going to south. And that was a long trip for her, but I was very proud because she went by herself and handled everything very well. But that is far different if you live in other parts of the U.S. For instance, I think if you're in Ohio, a lot of people, like our airport has just overwhelmed the Toledo. So people in southern Michigan, northern Ohio fly out of Detroit Metro because you're able to take the advantages of being that international hub that you cannot out of a smaller airport, correct?
Exactly. And in addition to northern Ohio and southeast Michigan, there's Canada too. We get a lot of Canadian customers. In fact, I was just talking to this with CBC today. This morning, they were asking about the decline in the value of the loonie, whether or not we were losing Canadian customers, and really the data doesn't show that we are. So for Windsor, Ontario, we're the hometown airport.
Very good, very good. And in many cases, you can take a direct flight out of Detroit Metro to European destinations, and what is that same link with the Orient connections to the Far West and South America? Do we offer a wide range of airlines?
Yes, actually, while there are 13 scheduled carriers, the carrier, obviously Delta Airlines, our hub carrier, is the one that offers the most international service, but we also have Lufthansa flying to Frankfurt, and we have Royal Jordanian flying to Amman, Jordan. Air France, as a partner with Delta, flies to London. So both Gatwick and Heathrow are covered in London, and Virgin Atlantic is the carrier that flies with Delta to London. So, and Delta also provides, you were talking about South America, we now have service south of the equator, scheduled nonstop service to Sao Paulo, Brazil, which
Excellent.
is a really growing market. But we have 40, on an average day, probably 40 international departures and a lot of those are in Canada and Mexico, Latin America. But over to Europe, we have Amsterdam, and that is 4 or 5 times a day because Delta has a relationship with KLM. So a KLM flyer can land in Detroit and connect to more than 140 destinations in the United States, or a Delta flyer can fly to Amsterdam and connect all across Europe, and even beyond Europe a little bit on KLM. So that's a really important connection. So we have Frankfurt, Amsterdam, London, Paris, and Rome is seasonal, and Amman. Those are all the international destinations that way. And then to the Far East, and we are one of the major hub airports to the Far East, is Tokyo, Nagoya, Japan, and Beijing and Shanghai and Hong Kong, or not Hong Kong, Seoul, Korea. So quite a bit of international service, and international service has a tremendous economic impact because people who are flying internationally tend to stay in their destination longer and spend more money. That's something that we pay a lot of attention to. In fact, I was just inside of our fence, we have 18,000 employees.
Wow.
And we know there's a lot more jobs across the state of Michigan than just those 18,000 because of the activity at the airport. But I called a lot of the auto. I'm trying to think of a way that I can quantify that when I'm doing interviews or talking to community groups. And so I called the auto companies to say, how many people work in Flat Rock plant? How many people work at Poletown? How many people work in the Rouge complex? And I didn't get answers from them, but Google is a wonderful thing, so I've got the information anyway. And it's 5 or 6 auto assembly plants is the equivalent of the number of people who work inside the fence. Now, they don't work for the airport authority, about between 500 and 600, but 500 different companies that operate at the airport. The rent-a-cars, the news and gift and food and beverage, and the parking operations, and all the TSA, the FAA, Customs, all those people that work add up to that 18,000. University of Michigan Dearborn did a study on our economic impact at our request, and they basically came to the conclusion they estimate that activity at Detroit Metropolitan Airport is responsible for $10.2 billion in economic impact across the state, and is responsible for generating about more than 80, I think it's 86,000 jobs. So in other words, if there was no Detroit Metro Airport, you would take that $10.2 billion out of the economic prosperity of the state every year.
And there's numerous Dearborn Heights residents. I'll have individuals who will come into City Hall and they'll stop, and during the course of a conversation, I find out that they are working directly at the airport in various capacities. So those of us that live anywhere in the region, but particularly close to the airport, it's a good source of jobs. If people are looking for a job, it's an excellent place to put applications in. But the local Dearborn Heights economy benefits because a lot of our residents directly work out at the airport.
That's right. And you know, we create some traffic congestion and noise and construction dust, but we also generate quite a few jobs and a lot of economic prosperity. And it really is possible because of the partnerships we have with the airlines, with our concessionaires. You have to understand their business and what they need to be able to do to be successful. And especially the airlines. They're looking for as low a cost as possible and as efficient of an airfield as possible and available terminal capacity. And the federal agencies as well. We just have a fantastic relationship. I talk to my counterparts at other airports once a year. I go to a convention of aviation communicators. And when I talk to my peers at other airports, they complain about, oh, the FAA is doing this, or oh, the TSA is doing this. But those people from those federal agencies that are assigned to Detroit are just fantastic to work with. So we have a good cooperative relationship.
It's good to hear. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that really for those of us that are Wayne County residents and not in the city of Romulus, we're not really in any way, shape, or fashion subsidizing the airport. The airport, in fact, is kind of self-sufficient with fares and the airlines, and it kind of operates. We don't actually put money in, do we? Or
No.
do we?
Unless you use the facility.
Yeah, that's what I mean. If you're using, but as it provides economic development, it provides jobs, but it's not asking us to subsidize it from a resident, like you say. Unless you're using the services, then fees will be attached through the airline's ticket you purchase, or if you park there or other things. But generally, it's self-sufficient.
Exactly, yeah. The way to think about it, the simplest way, and I'm not a financial person, so it has to be a simple way for me to understand it, but the simplest way to understand it is we are a residual airport. So at the end of the year, we operate like a business. The airport authority was created specifically to operate the airport like a business, but as a residual airport, basically the way it works is we generate as much revenue as we can with news and gift, food and beverage. Parking is a big one. Parking is probably the biggest chunk of non-airline revenue we have. And building rents and charges to the airlines. So less than half of what it costs us to operate and maintain the airport and make the payments on the debt service on our bonds is generated by us. The rest is made up by the airlines that operate at Detroit Metro Airport. So a little bit more than half of our cost of operating and making the debt service payments on our bonds is provided by airlines. And of course, the airlines that have the most operations pay the most. We base it on landing fees and gate rents, and there's a bunch of formulas, but it's airline revenue that really pays for the most of it. So we want air service. We want competitive air service. 19 of our top 20 destinations are flown by at least 2 airlines. So that's important to our customers. They want competition, so that helps to keep fares low. But the airlines themselves want their costs to be low. So we really focus as a business, first of all, operating efficiently, and secondly, focusing on those things that help us generate revenue so that the cost of the airlines is low enough, reasonable enough, that they study, well, let's see, we could fly to Cleveland, we could fly to Pittsburgh, we could fly Detroit, and that's one of the things they look at. They look at the strength of the market. They look at all those other things we talked about to be a successful hub, but they also look at cost, and so that's one of the key factors. So we're very comfortable that we are providing a very efficient airfield and a powerful airfield. Even during a snowstorm, we have a lot of capacity at a reasonable cost to the airlines, and that's really what helps attract Spirit and Frontier and Southwest and the carriers that put pressure on the big network carriers to provide service.
Talking about in not too distant future, we will be getting into the winter season. I know in a municipality, we've got the crews. We've already bought all our salt to get through the winter, and we should have plenty and all that. But those kind of dynamics for the airport, that's a lot of concrete. You've got to keep salted or in some way, shape, or fashion in good shape for planes to land and take off.
I just have a tremendous amount of admiration for our operations and maintenance departments who do all that pre-planning, and to some extent emergency management involved too. But we have 6 runways, and they're long. They're 150 feet wide, and our longest one is 10,500 feet long. So it's a lot of concrete, as you say, on all the parallel taxiways, all the feeder taxiways, the ramp areas. There's a lot of pavement there. Interesting that you mentioned salt. We can't use salt on the airfield because it has a corrosive effect on metal.
Okay.
And aircraft have a lot of metal parts. If you're driving down Ford Road and your fender falls off your car, that's not good.
Yeah.
But it's not a disaster
Right.
if some piece falls off an airplane. So we're not allowed to use salt anywhere on the airfield. Now on the roads and things like that, in fact we use quite a bit of it because we have a lot of roads as well. But on the airfield, we use other products. We
Is
use
it glycerol or something like that?
well, that's basically, you're thinking of glycol, propylene glycol that's used to de-ice aircraft.
Yeah.
That's a different product. We have a different product that we use for de-icing. But for the most part, we try to get the snow clear with brooms and plows and blowers. And we have, I think there's 9 of them now, trucks that are, I don't know, you can't really call them trucks. They're monstrous machines. They're multi-function pieces of equipment. They have a blade on the front. They have a broom in the center, and they have a de-icing mechanism in the back. They're sanding, whichever one is appropriate. So they can actually do 3 functions at the same time. And if you run those in tandem, you've got an efficient way to clear runways. The airlines and the FAA are very interested that we can get the runways cleared quickly and efficiently, but safely is the most important thing. So when we're done with the runway, we send friction testing equipment out to make sure that the surface of the pavement meets the federal standard for safety to safely land an aircraft.
Mm-hmm. It really is a remarkable industry, and the physics involved with how something that heavy can get up in the sky. I always was intrigued by that. I think I'm a little different than most people. I used to love the landing and the takeoffs, which people always said, I don't know, they seem to be concerned, and I just love the thrust of the plane taking off and then later on the landing. But that's me. Although I remember having an individual I used to fly with quite a bit. He was my boss, and he never liked to look out the window, and I was kind of glad because I like to look out the window, but people are different in regards to what they like or don't like. But that's interesting. That is a remarkable plant that has to keep functioning at all times. The other thing I was going to ask you, the interdependence, because I know more than once it had happened where a major event on the East Coast would have an effect on maybe a plane trip I was taking into the middle of the country, and they would say, well, your plane is stuck in New York. And that interdependence I just found fascinating. It's I'm sure, like when I was in school, we used to have to do these models on, like if we were a UPS, as to how to do the best way, and I think they utilize those planes that way, that it might fly from New York to Detroit and then onto, and then make a reverse circuit to get through a day. But the interdependence of all that is just phenomenal.
It's remarkable, yes, from an airline service point of view and from an air traffic control point of view as well. Every once in a while, a region air traffic control facility will have some kind of electrical problem or computer problems or something like that, and it does. It has an impact on the entire aviation system. We do get a lot of diversions. Having our powerful airfield, we have 6 runways, 4 of them parallel, which is the most efficient way to set up an airfield is with parallel runways. Probably the biggest reason we get diversions is snowstorms on the East Coast.
Okay.
So there will be a flight that launched from, let's say, Asia or Europe before a real heavy snow was predicted. And as it turns out, LaGuardia or Newark or Philadelphia or one of those East Coast airports will have, and they have pretty congested airspace in the East Coast and the Northeast. They'll be having problems landing aircraft efficiently. And to some extent, Chicago as well, because when you look at the globe, we're right next to Chicago.
Right.
It's in that we're really, if you drive it, it doesn't seem like we're right next to them, but from a global perspective, we are. So if there's inclement weather, especially that wasn't predicted, those aircraft a lot of time will come to Detroit if it's an international flight, because we have the ability at our airport to clear passengers through customs and immigration, the federal inspection services, and take care of that aircraft, and after the storm passes, get it on its way. Now, there are occasions when we will have a situation here in Detroit. Heavy fog is probably the most likely culprit, where aircraft headed to Detroit are diverted as well. And I think one of when you talk about the interconnectedness of all the airports, if you remember September 11th, the federal government made a decision when I think the third aircraft, they said, okay, we got to get everything out of the sky and then look at what blips are left, and those could be potential problems. And all the aircraft that were flying ended up landing at the closest airport, and it was 4 days of trying to get everybody into the right communities, because aviation all suddenly was gone. And aviation is, $2.2 trillion business globally. The last study I saw said aviation is responsible for 3.5% of global GDP. So it's something, like I said before, we create some noise and we create some construction dust and traffic congestion, but it's a really important part of our economy.
Yeah, there's no other way. I can't imagine, I wouldn't even think of doing it, driving to the West Coast, but you can get on a plane and 4 hours later you're at your destination, and as soon as you get through the time differential, because you're ready to go to bed and everybody's just finishing dinner, but after you get acclimated, but I can't imagine how people years ago, I think that's why there were no baseball teams on the other side of the Mississippi. There was no way to travel there reasonably except for maybe train. And our world has really gotten so much smaller, and you can travel. And actually giving us all opportunities to make new friends, experience different lifestyles, and the whole world's kind of shrunk. But yeah, it really is. We're very fortunate to have an airport like we have here that allows us to gain the access. Another question came to mind. You have, I think the Willow Run is also part of the same operation, but Willow Run is used, for smaller airlines and for moving freight?
Yes, exactly. So the Airport Authority manages three major properties: Detroit Metropolitan Airport, Willow Run Airport, and Crosswinds Marsh down in Sumter Township.
Okay.
And we could talk about Crosswinds Marsh a little bit if there's time, but
Sure.
Willow Run is primarily it's designated as a reliever airport because it's that close to Detroit Metro and has runway capacity. It doesn't have the runway length for the long haul international
Was
stuff.
that originally built? People told me that they were building bombers at the GM plant, and they needed a long place to move those bombers out to during World War II, and that's how Willow Run. I don't know if that's true or not, but
Yes.
that's what I was told.
Essentially, Henry Ford built Willow Run Airport because that's correct. He was tasked by the federal government to build B-24 bombers, and Henry Ford said, I can do it more efficiently than you're doing it. I can do it on an assembly line, and I'll prove it. So the Willow Run plant was created. It was formerly, I think, an orchard, and he built the big GM plant, what became the GM plant, and had a auto assembly or aircraft assembly line. And he said, we're going to get to the point where we're producing one aircraft an hour. Well, they operated for quite a long time before they got to that level of efficiency because there's so many parts in an aircraft, even in a B-24 World War II era bomber. But they did reach at a certain point an aircraft an hour on that assembly line, and they built more than 8,600
Wow.
B-24 bombers at Willow Run plant. And he built the runways in, actually it was 6 runways so that you could test them in all different weather conditions. So aircraft operate best with their nose into the wind. So
Yes.
that's why he built that airfield. Now, we don't use all 6 runways today. In fact, we've removed some of them because we just don't need to have the expense of controlling that pavement. But Willow Run, in addition to its historic nature, is primarily responsible for cargo and general aviation. So there's a lot of private pilots that are flying from one community to the other. Detroit Metro is an option. Any aircraft that's in the sky that wants to land in Detroit, because it's a public airport, they can land at Detroit Metro. But a lot of pilots prefer Willow Run because they don't have to get in line behind all these scheduled, especially if it's during a hub where there's a lot of arrivals at the same time. So Willow Run is ideal for them. Flight schools, and a lot of on-demand charter cargo. So you're an auto manufacturer, your assembly line goes down in who knows where, someplace else, and you've manufactured the part here in Dearborn or River Rouge or Detroit or wherever. It can get sent on one of those cargo planes. They're like Domino's Pizza. They'll deliver cargo on demand, charter. There's also some scheduled cargo that occurs out there as well. But Detroit Metro also has cargo operations. In fact, you were earlier mentioning Toledo. DHL, which is an international freight carrier, just recently announced announced this month that they are moving their cargo operation from Toledo Airport to Detroit. And it's so they can be closer to the auto suppliers and the auto manufacturers, because that's where a lot of their international freight comes from. That's where the demand is, both in and out. So that's good news. Big cargo carriers prefer to operate at a major international airport, because a lot of that small packages and airmail and freight actually flies in the bellies of regularly scheduled aircraft. So they want to be able to process that cargo, to sequence it. So we do have UPS and FedEx and DHL now operating at Detroit Metro. But a lot of the on-demand, like Calita and Activero, they prefer Willow Run Airport, and it's available for them.
I want to approach the subject, but I know some people, I don't want to create any anxiety for people who may have concerns about flight, although it's the safest thing. I remember years ago, relatives, first time they would fly, and they'd go to they used to have these hubs where you buy insurance, and we would all laugh that you don't need to buy that, you're just wasting your money. But movies that have come out, have we ever had any odd ones? Is anybody I'm thinking of the one movie I saw where somebody was transporting snakes in the belly of the plane, and they got
Snakes on a plane.
Yeah. Have we had weird situations like that, or been pretty normal? Because I don't hear about these things.
Yeah. You're right about aviation being a safe form of transporting people. On a per trip basis, elevators and escalators are probably safer, but on a per mile basis, there's no means of transportation that's as safe as aviation.
You're safer getting on a plane and going to the West Coast than you are getting an automobile and driving somewhere
to the airport.
To the airport. It's absolutely statistically. And I'm not so sure escalators are that safe, because when I was at Ford Land Development, I couldn't believe how many people used to lose fingers at Fairlane Mall. And I assumed they were not watching their kids, but elevators I think are safe, but escalators I'm not sure I put in that same category. But so it's no unusual situations. Everything's been pretty.
I'm trying to think of. We've certainly had challenges that come up.
But the fact that you have to think about it tells me that there's. I know that when you see and you land in Detroit Metro, because it's flat land and all the sight lines and everything. But I recall flying into Phoenix, Arizona, and after I got out of the plane and looking at the airport for traveling to the hotel, and all I could see were mountains all around this thing, and I'm wondering how. So I did inquire on the return trip, and they said, oh yeah, we got to get in between these two mountains and then get into the landing strip. And here, the sight lines and everything, I would think it's a easier way of getting to our airport for a pilot to fly into here.
From that perspective, yes. There's a few airports that are very popular, especially some of the Caribbean islands, where they have pretty short runways.
Oh, yeah.
And, they could bring in 757s and aircraft because there's a lot of demand for that service. But, we have plenty of long runways, and you're right. The approach control and departure control procedures are not very complicated here in Detroit. And we don't have another airport other than Willow Run, and they keep that airspace separate. But we don't have another major airport that there would be a conflict in terms of air traffic. And on the East Coast, there's so many pretty large-size airports out there. And in the case of even San Francisco and Oakland, that's the kind of thing that you have to be very careful. Now, we're by no means as large as the largest, like Atlanta, with the world's busiest airport in terms of passengers, handling, nearly 100 million passengers. But we have, or Chicago, which is the busiest airport in the world in terms of operations,
And that'd be
landings and takeoffs.
O'Hare, obviously, not Midway, but
Exactly,
O'Hare.
yeah.
And I've never flown into Midway, although people told me that's a very short runway and then the home start. But O'Hare and Atlanta, it's the same way. That
Yeah.
those are huge. And
Yeah.
if you have to change airlines, I can only imagine what people have to go through.
Yeah.
But
Well,
get
you
through
know,
it.
they've got it worked out. Both of those airports have a great management team, and I have a lot of respect for both of those airports, and they handle a lot more customers than we do. That being said, however, we do handle 32.5 million passengers for the
Wow.
last last year was 32.5, and the years before that was 32.4.
It's a lot of
real
people.
close. 3 times the population of the state of Michigan.
Yeah.
In fact, if you took every man, woman, and child in Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, and they all went to the airport in the same year, that's basically what we handle. So it sounds like it would be a disaster, but you know, most people who are connecting are only there for an hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half.
My experience has been that everything runs very efficient. My only complaint in all airports that the chairs that you wait in aren't the most comfortable in the world. But other than that, yeah, it's like I say, I actually enjoy flying in planes. I think it's just a great way to travel, and it's enjoyable.
I remember the last time my wife and I we drove back from Florida. We were visiting some friends in Florida, and I was driving that long stretch in Ohio saying, why are we doing this?
Well, Ohio, I have made that trip. I thought they were moving the state of Georgia further along because Georgia was bad, and that's like 300 and some miles. I don't remember the mile markers now. It's been a while. But that's quite a trip, and Ohio is the other one.
Yeah.
You know, you can get through Tennessee in 180 miles, but yeah, those other ones take their time.
Georgia is a long state. It just seems like you're in there forever.
That's what I felt. I kept saying that I think Florida's sinking to the south on us. So,
you get in a plane in 2.5 hours. You're in the bag claim in any airport in Florida, just about. And you know, the only disadvantage is you don't have your car. But there's plenty of places to rent cars.
Well, and when I've told people that in a lot of heavy areas like New York, Washington D.C., I don't want a car. There's no place to park it.
Right.
And if you there are destinations that the mass transit. Well, I think we covered a lot of stuff, and hopefully made the general public in Dearborn Heights more aware of what a great thing it is to have Detroit Metro Airport in our backyard, and the economic benefits of it, but also the opportunities it gives us as travelers that you wouldn't necessarily have if you were in other parts of the country. So anything that we should cover in closing, or did we cover?
No, I think we did cover a lot of it. I wanted to make sure I got the point about that the airport does have an enormous economic impact on the region. And anybody who has a question, public.affairs@wcaa.us, you can send us an email or just call us at 734-AIRPORT, and we'll be happy to help in any way we can.
Okay, and we're going to show that on the bottom so that people can get the website and the number to make contact. Mike, it's been a pleasure having you here, and thank you for being on my show. And I want to thank the audience for watching another edition of the Mayor Dan Paletko Show.